What is up, everybody? This is your boy, Teran Rodriguez, bringing you another edition of Set Points. Conference play is in full swing in the ACC as we are going to play ourselves a little game later on in the episode as we will be playing contenders and pretenders. Which teams can contend for the conference title and which teams are pretenders for the conference title. And the SEC kicks off conference play this week. You probably didn't think that this was going to happen, but it is time for SEC volleyball. It is going to be an exciting time, and who's the favorite to win that conference? I'll find out later in the episode. And North Carolina and Duke have themselves a little bit of a really cool rivalry game, the Battle of the Blue rivalry. I kind of named myself. Who came out on top? And which team was able to take the most matches against those two? And we have ourselves big previews of certain games such as Pitt and Notre Dame, as well as Texas State and Louisiana. Will those teams put on a show in their conference series this week? All that and more here on Set Point. This is Teran Rodriguez bringing you another edition of Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. And welcome one, welcome all to Set Point, the volleyball podcast that is the most, or some of the most. Either way, I'm your boy Teran Rodriguez. I'll be your host, as you already know. Without any further delay, let's dive on into some of these matches. First, we're going to recap the matches from last week. First, I gotta give a shout out to the chat room. Big shout out to Larry B for popping in the chat room. Thanks for tuning in, my brother. I appreciate you. Alright, so now let's get on into some of these matchups that happened last week, such as Baylor and Oklahoma. Now, I thought this was a sneaky good game right here. I really thought this was going to be a sneaky good match. The first one was a great match. The second one, not really. So, for those of you that don't know, Oklahoma has had one of the more roughest seasons. Like their first week, they had to open against Texas on their home floor, and Texas pretty much took them to the shed for the most part. Then they had a bye week, which is kind of inconvenient considering you don't really want to have a bye too early on, especially when your next opponent is going to be something of super talented, and you're coming off of a loss. So, and to me, I think that's kind of not the best place to have a bye, like the second week of the season. So their bye came last week, a couple weeks ago, and then last week they played Baylor at Baylor. Were they successful? So so we're just going to quickly run down through this as quick as possible. So Baylor took the match, but it wasn't easy, surprisingly. So the first set, Baylor just dominates Oklahoma. Oklahoma literally had no answer for them. They were just manhandling them. It was just not fun times for Oklahoma. And keep in mind, Baylor and Texas are two of the favorites to win the Big 12 this year. And honestly, and Oklahoma is a good third place team, but that's as good as it's going to get. Because in any other conference, they might be able to contend for a conference title, but in the Big 12, they're pretty much a distant third. So back to Oklahoma and Baylor, the first match. Baylor just stomped on Oklahoma first set 25-16, which I kind of was expecting that, just because Baylor has a lot of firepower and they return a lot of their players, and this is kind of a road for redemption after they lost in the NCAA semifinals last year. So second set was more so of the same and then some, as Baylor took the second set 25-13, and I'm just looking at these sets, it's like, whew, yeesh. It's not looking too good for Oklahoma, honestly. But then something sparked for Oklahoma in set 3. Oklahoma just came out firing on all cylinders, and they were not ready to go down without a fight. Oklahoma took the third set 25-17, and they were still in the match. Then the fourth set was back and forth action. Baylor had a lead, then Oklahoma had a lead, then Baylor, I think, had a late lead, and then Oklahoma pulled out a magic comeback out of their hats in set 4, and then boom, they took set 4 25-22. So that pretty much forced the fifth set, which really impressed me. I was very impressed with Oklahoma's resiliency. I definitely thought Baylor was pretty much going to take them to the shed, but I don't know. I think I think they're a sneaky good team in the Big 12. I don't think they're the best team, but I certainly don't think they're the worst team. So fifth set action, it was just back and forth. I'm almost certain Baylor and Oklahoma didn't have a lead as big as 2 points early on. Like, it didn't get until the lead didn't get separated for either team until like the latter parts of set 5. Because Baylor took a 11-7 lead, and it looked like they were going to avoid the upset. But then Oklahoma just wasn't going to go down without a fight. They eventually got the game to 14-13 in favor of Baylor, but then Baylor just closed it out with a kill, and then that was it. And Baylor managed to avoid the upset, but that was some impressive stuff from Oklahoma. Looking at the box score, Ysonia Presley, the reigning AVCA Player of the Year, did her thing as she had 22 kills. She took 53 swings, and she had 8 errors, but she hit a solid 264. Cara McGee, the middle blocker, had 14 kills, only 4 hitting errors, for a hitting percentage of .333. And Marieke Vandermark had 9 kills. She had 5 errors and 31 swings for a hitting percentage of .129. Not too bad. So overall, it was a solid little offensive effort on Baylor's part. As for Oklahoma, they were led by Guy Diouf, who had 20 kills on 48 swings with 6 errors for a hitting percentage of .292. That's pretty solid, honestly. Sarah Sanders had 14 kills, 6 errors, 39 swings for a hitting percentage of .205, and that's okay. Sana Dotson had 13 kills, 5 hitting errors, and 30 attempts for a hitting percentage of .267, and I'm sorry if you all heard that. I don't know why that had to pop up at that time. So, yeah, Sarah Dotson, 13 kills, 5 errors, and 30 attempts for a hitting percentage of .267. Assists, Callie Williams had 49 assists for Baylor, which ran their 5-1 offense. Oklahoma's setter, Grace Talpash, had 42 assists, which also ran a 5-1 offense, which means they only ran one setter, which is cool. And then dig-wise, surprisingly, Oklahoma outdug Baylor 62-53. If you had told me that Baylor outdug or Oklahoma outdug Baylor, honestly, I wouldn't have believed you. But that's some impressive stuff. Oklahoma almost had 4 players in double digits in terms of digs. Kaiten Kinley had 14 digs. Diouf had 13 digs to go along with her 20 kills. And Talpash had 11 digs. Also got to make note that Aisha Hardy had 9 digs as well. So that's pretty good stuff on Oklahoma's part. For Baylor, they were led by Chanel Bramschreiber, who had 19 digs, and Ysonia Presley was the second dig leader with 10 digs. So Ysonia Presley obviously chipped in her double-double, which is what an AVCA Player of the Year should be doing. And I'm not going to get into the second match just because Baylor swept Oklahoma, and I don't think I have a lot to talk about today. So quick and dirty, Baylor just swept Oklahoma. I don't know what happened in that match. I think Oklahoma might have used up all of their volleyball juice and pretty much just ran out of gas, which is disappointing, but it is what it is. So, yeah. So, Oklahoma is still looking for its first win. You kind of can't blame them for the losses because they have such a tough schedule starting off. They start off with Texas, then a bye, then Baylor, Now the schedule kind of eases up for them. They've gone through the worst of their schedule, and now they can only go up from here on out. They're the only team in the conference who has yet to register a win, but that's going to change soon. Oklahoma plays Kansas this week, and then next week they are at Kansas State. And honestly, I think Oklahoma can finish third in the conference. I don't think any team opposes Oklahoma, especially after that performance. So. And I don't think there aren't a whole lot of teams that have that can say they've taken a set off of Texas and lived to tell the tale. So honestly, yeah. And Larry said it best in the chat room. Texas and Baylor are two tough teams to start off with. Facts. They're the number 1 and number 2 team of the AVCA polls, coaches polls, which. That's kind of rough. If you're having to start off with that, then we pray for you. We will pray for you. So that is kind of a rough deal for Oklahoma. But the fact that they've gotten those matches out of the way, and the fact that they actually held their own against Baylor the first time, really shows that Oklahoma is a kind of a sleeper team. And they took a set off of Texas. I don't know if Texas had called off the starters and put in the reserves. But I'm not gonna judge. Like, if you take a set off Texas, then bully for you. And I mean, it was at Oklahoma, but still, take a set off of a powerhouse team like Texas is pretty good. So good stuff there for Baylor, and as they're still they're still on track with Texas. They're 5-1, but they're not out of the playoff, the Big 12 Conference Championship just yet. They just can't afford another loss. This coming week, or this week, Baylor plays at Texas Tech, and they're not going to really get too much of a challenge, as the week after they play Iowa State, then they play Western Virginia, then they play at Texas. That's the big one right there. So, and then they have themselves a little 2-week bye after their matchup with Texas, and then they play Kansas State. So, honestly, I think Baylor is fine as long as they don't overlook their opponent. Just my take. And then I'll be talking about Texas in a little bit. I'll be previewing one of Texas's the matchup for Texas. So we'll be coming back to the Big 12, honestly, and we haven't seen the last of this. So let's jump from the Big 12 all the way to the ACC as we had Georgia Tech take on Florida State. This was actually Florida State's season opener, and long story short, Georgia Tech brought out the brooms and swept Florida State. It didn't get... First set, Georgia Tech took the first set 25-17. Second set, Georgia Tech won that set 25-18. And then the third set was a little tough. I think Florida State... I think the first match really was just more so of Florida State being super rusty, because this was their first match of the season. And Georgia Tech has already played some matches already, so they've already played 2 matches, albeit against Miami. But Miami has actually proved themselves to be a really talented team, which I also am going to be talking about in a little bit. So the first match, Georgia Tech swept Florida State. The third set, Georgia Tech beat Florida State 26-24, which they got the sweep. It wasn't overly surprising, honestly. Julia Bergman led Georgia Tech. The sophomore outside hitter sensation was a big hit for Georgia Tech, as she had 17 kills with only 4 hitting errors and then she had 38 swings for a hitting percentage of .342. Someone else that stepped up for Georgia Tech that was big was Mariana Brambilla, who had 15 kills, only 4 hitting errors, and 35 swings for .314. She was also making some good defensive plays, as she and Bergman were in double digits in digs with 11 and 10 kills respectively for Bergman and Brambilla. So Julia Bergman can do everything. Like, she is probably one of the more talented players in the ACC, but when Mariana Brambilla gets involved and she's making plays, that just makes Georgia Tech a much more talented team. I think that first loss to Miami doesn't reflect how good or how bad Georgia Tech is. I think that reflects how good Miami is, because Miami is looking pretty decent as well. I'll be talking about them a little bit later, but right now we just got to finish up with this Georgia Tech-Florida State matchup. So Florida State was led by Emma Clothier with 15 kills. Jasmine Martin had 8 kills. Clothier didn't have any hitting errors, and she hit 682. So that's pretty solid. And Jasmine Martin didn't have any hitting errors for a hitting percentage of 348. She did take 23 swings, while Clothier took 22 swings. And then third leader in kills for Florida State was Morgan Chacon, who had 5 kills for 2 errors in 21 attempts for 143 hitting percentage. And then assist-wise, Florida State ran themselves a 6-2, which means they ran 2 setters. Lily Tessier had 16 assists, while Olivia Daly had 15 assists, which that's kind of cool. It's kind of like how the New Orleans Saints use 2 quarterbacks with Drew Brees and Taysom Hill. But we're not going to get into that because that's football, and I digress. Anyway, so dig-wise, Caroline Golden led Florida State in digs with 14 of them things, and Daly had 8 digs, and then Chacon had 7 digs. So overall, and Florida State outblocked Georgia Tech 5-4, but that didn't really matter. It looked like no defense was being played at the net, honestly. But that's just me just saying that. Hitting percentage wise, both teams had pretty solid hitting percentages. Georgia Tech hit 333. Florida State hit 265. Not all that great, but still a solid hitting percentage. You can't take that away. So that was the first matchup between Georgia Tech and Florida State. Shout out to Andrew Hagenbaugh for popping in the chat room. It's going good, Andrew. Thanks for tuning in. I definitely appreciate that. So now let's go into match number 2 between Georgia Tech and Florida State. And this one was no different. In fact, I think it was a lot less shorter. It was a lot less shorter. I don't know the terms of time, but I'm pretty sure it was a lot shorter than the first matchup. So Georgia Tech took the first set over Florida State 25-14. Second set was 25-17. And the third set was 25-20. Georgia Tech just meant business in this matchup, because honestly I could see Georgia Tech as a sneaky contender in that ACC, because the ACC is not decided yet. It's nowhere near decided. I think there's a couple more weeks after this week, so a couple more weeks, maybe one more week afterwards. I'll be double checking, but Larry says I'm going to be talking some Barcelona volleyball. Yeah, we might get into some Barcelona volleyball. So anyway, back to Georgia Tech and Florida State. Remember how I said Julia Bergman is the golden girl for Georgia Tech? Well, Mariana Brambilla led the way in terms of kills for Georgia Tech, as she had 17 kills. She had 4 hitting errors, but she made up for that with a hitting percentage of 394. Bergman had 13 kills and on 19 attempts with no hitting errors for a hitting percentage of 684. My goodness. I also do need to mention first I'm just gonna continue to run down through the box score. Michaela Dowd had 9 kills for a hitting percentage of 313. She had 3 hitting errors, but she only had 18 hit attempts, which is pretty good, pretty solid. So as for Florida State, they had themselves a little bit of a rougher day than the previous game. Clothier had 8 kills. Emma Clothier had 8 kills. Jasmine Martin and Morgan Chacon each had 7 kills. And then assist-wise, they still ran their 6-2 offense. Lily Tessier had 16 kills. Olivia Daly had 11. Lily Tessier had 16 assists, while Olivia Daly had 11 assists, while Maddie McKissock had 40 assists for Georgia Tech. She is the setter for Georgia Tech, and they just run a 5-1. They don't run a 6-2, so there's that. And in terms of digs, Brambilla had 11 digs. She was making a lot of big plays, just like the last game. And that's the thing about Georgia Tech that makes them special. If Julia Bergman isn't having her best game, Mariana Brambilla fills the void, and vice versa. So they make for a great dynamic duo, and honestly, it's really scary on how good Georgia Tech was. I just think that first match against Miami, that was just maybe a little bit of rust, or maybe it was a NIVC hangover, because Georgia Tech did win the NIVC last year, but that didn't really mean much considering it's the Invitational and not the actual NCAA tournament. But I digress. So as in terms of digs for Florida State, they only had 5 digs from 3 different players. In terms of digs, they only had 28, while Georgia Tech had 39. The hitting percentages were way one-sided, as Georgia Tech had a hitting percentage of .446, while Florida State had a hitting percentage of .181. That's not going to get it done for Florida State. Granted, Florida State had to play at Georgia Tech, but I thought that Florida State was going to be a little bit better than that. I didn't think they were going to get swept twice. But again, this is only their first matchup of the season. They're going to start to pick it up as the season progresses. Like, they didn't ask for a delayed start in their season, and it's tough because you have to basically just watch film and practice. You're not going out and battling other teams to better yourself. You're just bettering yourselves in practice. But that's just me, honestly. So overall, it was a really impressive series sweep for Georgia Tech. Florida State does have a little work to do. They still have a lot of things to clean up on, but it's only the start of their season. Like, they definitely have plenty of time to get back on track, and I think that Florida State can bounce back this week. So, looking ahead to Georgia Tech's schedule, they play at Wake Forest this week. I can see Georgia Tech sweeping that matchup as well. As for Florida State, they play at home against Miami. Going to be their nice little crosstown rivalry. I'm going to be previewing that matchup in a little bit, right after I conclude the recap of the noteworthy matches from last week. And we're going to keep it in the ACC. The noteworthy matchups. I could recap everything, but that's just going to take a little too long. So now let's recap the final noteworthy matchup of last week, and that was Duke and North Carolina. So, in case you were wondering why this is a noteworthy matchup, I went on a little bit of a rant last week saying that Duke was the most fraudulent 3-0 team I've ever seen, because they hadn't beaten anyone that was noteworthy. I believe they had only beaten North Carolina State and Virginia Tech. Or was it Virginia? Either way, I did not believe them. Like, they were the most... I wasn't buying them being 3-0. Like, that's like, you give another team like Pitt, Notre Dame, Louisville, the schedule that Duke has, they go 3-0 easy with no sweat. And that's not a jock to the teams that Duke played, but it is what it is. So so let's get into this little matchup. Duke played North Carolina last weekend, and the first matchup was quite interesting. North Carolina took a tight first set, 26-24. It was back and forth. I think Duke led for the most part, and then North Carolina came up strong, and then they took the first set off of a double block, which was very impressive. North Carolina took the second set 25-17, more one-sided than normal. But then Duke came firing back and won the third set 25-20. And then Duke was actually ahead in the fourth set, and it looked like maybe it was going to be a going 5. And then North Carolina said, nah, we're not letting you do this. This is our house. We're not going to lose. And they won that fourth set 25-16. So that just goes to show you how fraudulent Duke was. North Carolina had only played 2 matches, and one of those their losses was to Virginia Tech, which was slated to finish at the bottom of the ACC. So I knew North Carolina was going to win one match. I just thought it was going to be the second one, but I don't know. I don't know. Either way, I was very disappointed in the fact that on how bad Duke on how bad Duke played. Like, you can't be losing games like that. So, looking at the box score for North Carolina, they had themselves one of the more balanced attacks. I only wish Ben Sutterth was in the chat room, but I digress. Amanda Fegley led the way for North Carolina with 13 kills, only one hitting error for a hitting percentage of .600. She was outstanding. Isaiah Buckner had 12 kills along with Austin Parker Austin, who also had 12 kills. Austin hit 133, had 6 hitting errors, while Buckner had a hitting percentage of .308, and she had 4 hitting errors. And Kaya Merkler had 9 kills, only 2 hitting errors for a hitting percentage of .412, which is pretty impressive. As for Duke, they were led by Aid Onokonrian, who had 16 kills, hitting percentage of .220, but she did have 7 errors. Gracie Johnson also had 10 kills, but she had 8 errors only for a hitting percentage of 51. Ugh. Duke as a whole hit 161. I'm just going to throw that out there. And those are their only 2 players that were in double digits in terms of kills. That right there. See, for those of you that want to argue and say Duke is a better team than North Carolina, no. They got exposed that matchup. North Carolina exposed them for the frauds they are. I knew Duke was not for real. They were playing such a cakewalk schedule that I knew North Carolina was going to expose them in this rivalry. Because when it comes to rivalry games, anything can happen. And North Carolina proved that theory, especially in the ACC. So, good on you, North Carolina. I'm proud of you. I'm going to give you the mini applause button. Alright, so the second matchup between North Carolina and Duke, well, let's just say it didn't go the way that I thought it was going to go. I kind of knew this was going to happen, but it kind of had another reversal of fate. Duke actually took the first set 25-21, then North Carolina took the second set 26-24, then Duke took the third set strongly 25-18, and then Duke actually followed that up by taking the fourth set 25-21, and they actually won the match. So I guess good for Duke. I kind of think that Duke losing that first game rung their bell, and for good reason as well. And looking at the box scores, for this match, Peyton Schwantz led the way for Duke with 16 kills, only 2 hitting errors for a hitting percentage of .500. Good stuff. Aid Owokonrian had 10 kills with a hitting percentage of .133. She had 6 errors, but that's alright. We can forgive that. Then Lizzie Fleming had 8 kills, 4 errors for a hitting percentage of .167. Pretty good. So as for North Carolina, they were led by Destiny Cox, who had 19 kills. She had 6 hitting errors for a hitting percentage of .283. As a whole, before I get into the rest of the kill stats, I'm just going to say North Carolina hit a whopping 88 for the match. 88! You go from having an impressive hitting percentage from the last match to hitting 88 in this match. What? How could you do this? How can you do this, North Carolina? Why would you do this to me? You can't be having that low of a hitting percentage. And the worst part is, Destiny Cox had 19 kills. Their next kill leader had 7 kills, and that was Isaiah Buckner and Kayla Merkler, who each had 7 kills. Buckner hit 0 for the match. She had 7 kills, 7 errors, and 29 swings. Merkler had 4 hitting errors, and she hit .231. Destiny Cox was the only player that really stood out to me when it came to kills. Everyone else disappointed, and I guess I should also mention that Parker Austin had 6 kills, but she had 9 errors for a hitting percentage of -107, which that right there is. I'm just gonna do my best Al Michaels impersonation. Now that's overwhelming, which that's not really good. You cannot hit a negative percentage. Otherwise, one of two things. One, your hand is broken, or your hand is hurt, or your hand is just not 100%, or you're just not having a good night in general, or C, you just broke up with your loved one. Either way, it was just not her night. It was just not North Carolina's night in general. I don't know if it was overconfidence or Duke kind of got woken up, but still. I kind of think that North Carolina could have done better this match. It's just disappointing that they hit 88 for the match. That's not good. Duke, on the other hand, hit 240, and they outdug North Carolina 58-50, which is nice. And then they certainly outblocked North Carolina. North Carolina didn't have a solo stuff. So that's good stuff right there. And overall, it was just not a good second match for North Carolina. Would have been great if North Carolina got the sweep, but I guess Duke has some resiliency. But do I think that they're a contender? I'll have to find that out later on in the show. So we're actually going to take ourselves a quick little break. When I come back, we are going to preview this week's matchups. And we're going to get into some SEC volleyball action, and we're going to play contenders and pretenders in the latter part of the show. So you're listening to Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
Lay down music.
Hey, what's up, BS3 sports fans? If you love listening to the BS3 Sports Show, check out the weekend wrap-up every Monday at 12:15 Central Time, 1:15 Eastern, recapping the weekend in sports like you never heard it before. Comedy, interactive chat room, it's a must-listen. Weekend wrap-up on Spreaker.com, part of the X Squad. Check it out. You won't be disappointed.
Attention, all sports fans! If you're someone who wakes up each morning with lists of sporting events to go along with your to-do list for the day, then you just might be a diehard. The world of sports is as vast as the ocean is deep, including the major leagues, the minor leagues, the college, and everything in between. This is me, your boy Larry B of IE Sports Radio, welcoming you to join me every Monday evening at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern on The Defining Moment, a show that focuses on what really matters in the sports world, sports themselves, and nothing outside of them. Once again, tune in for The Defining Moment with me, your boy Larry B, every Monday evening at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern on IE Sports Radio, right here on Spreaker.com. We'll see you there.
And we are back with Set Point. You can catch The Defining Moment and all of those shows on IE Sports Radio, and that was the voice of the founder of IE Sports Radio, Mr. Larry B., who was in the chat room. Appreciate you for tuning in. And then also the first drop was from Ben Suttereth III, who is the founder of BS3 Radio. His parents actually have themselves a podcast going on tonight. It's called Suds Are Us, and it's hosted by Ben Suttereth. I think it was Ben Jr. and Irene Suttereth, and they talk about a lot of things like life and marriage and happiness and peace and all that. So, wish I could tune in, but we have Set Point going on, so there's that. So, now let's get ready for the second half of the show, as we're going to dive on in to some SEC volleyball. I can't believe it's here. Yes, SEC volleyball is here. I can't believe it. I didn't think it was ever going to get here. I'm so happy. I didn't think I'm just don't have the words to say. So SEC volleyball is here. However, there's not really too many standout matches this week. Just to skim through most of these matchups, we have Kentucky versus Tennessee at Kentucky. Florida's on bye. Missouri's on bye. Georgia plays South Carolina at home. And Arkansas plays Mississippi State. Auburn and Bama have a bye. Ole Miss has a bye. And that's it. But there is one noteworthy matchup that I'm going to preview. And, well, first and foremost, I'm just gonna go right now when it comes to quick and Diet Coke like predictions. Kentucky's gonna sweep Tennessee. That's a given. Georgia's gonna sweep South Carolina. I guess I'll take Mississippi State to. I'll take Mississippi State and Arkansas to split matchups, just because I'm a nice guy. But now there is one more matchup in the SEC that is definitely worth previewing, and I'm surprised this matchup actually is worth. This one is actually surprisingly going to be a good matchup. It's Texas A&M and LSU. So I thought at first this matchup was going to be all Texas A&M, and for good reason as well. So both of these teams obviously have not played in any matches. So there will probably be a little bit of rust. But let's go through the players to watch for. So some players to watch for are outside hitter Lauren Davis, who last year had 257 kills, she's an outside hitter, like I said. She's definitely talented, and she did have only a hitting percentage of 186, but the fact that she was second in kills is impressive. Texas A&M did lose Halan Hans to graduation. She had a whopping 534 kills last year, so that was pretty darn impressive, if you ask me. Other players to watch for on Texas A&M is Mallory Talbert, who had 205 kills for a hitting percentage of 290. She led the team in blocks with 91, and she's a middle blocker. She's going to be key in the middle, so I definitely think she's going to be a force for Texas A&M, for the Aggies. This player really stood out to me. Camille Connor. She is a junior setter. No, she's a senior setter, and she finished with 1,200 assists last year. She had 198 kills, which is darn impressive, and she had 222 digs. So this girl is like a 5-tool player, and honestly, she's definitely going to be pivotal for the offense for the Aggies. And then they have Trayana Rush, who is an opposite, who had 173 kills for a hitting percentage of 164. One player who doesn't return, who was actually an underclassman, was McKenna Patterson. I don't know her whereabouts, and I'm not going to get too much into that, but she doesn't return for Texas A&M, and I'm not going to guess why she's not on there. Maybe she opted out, maybe she transferred, maybe she's not going to play this year, maybe other things. Maybe I'm not going to assume. So that's just me. So Texas A&M did lose their libero from last year in Camila Gomez. However, they do return their backup libero, Taylor Voss, who had 212 digs, which is pretty solid. And I think that she's going to be pivotal for. She's going to anchor that defense for the Aggies, and I definitely think she's going to be key. And last year, Texas A&M had a lot of success. They made it all the way to the round of 16 of the NCAA tournament, where they lost at number 4 Wisconsin, which was to be expected. They did beat number 21 Rice in the round of 32, and they beat St. John's in the first round. But this Texas A&M team is pretty solid. So this is probably the dark horse of the SEC. Kentucky and Florida are both talented. I'm going to probably dive deep into them as the season progresses because I want to see Kentucky play an actual team. Kentucky has a bye next week, and then Florida plays at Auburn, which I'm pretty sure Florida will win. Auburn does have former USC coach Brent Crouch, so I'm kind of going to be interested in seeing that. But honestly, I want to see Florida and Kentucky play actual good teams. Like Kentucky's first challenge is when they play at Missouri in a couple in 2 weeks. And Florida, on the other hand, Florida to me has a cakewalk schedule. They have one of the more lighter schedules. Florida plays at Auburn next week, and then they play Alabama at home. Then they have a bye next week. They have another bye, and then they play at South Carolina, and then then they have another bye, and then, well, it's like a mini bye, and then they play Georgia to close out the season. That is a light schedule. I don't think any of those teams won an NCAA game. The only team that made the NCAA tournament last year of those 4 teams that Florida is playing is Georgia. And they lost a 2-0 lead to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. This is the problem with the shortened conference schedule. Teams like Florida are getting paper soft schedules that if they just breeze through them, lo and behold, they'll be 8-0, and then they'll be conference champions, and that's it. Another team that I think has a soft schedule is Texas A&M. Texas A&M has LSU. Now, LSU is kind of their big matchup. I think it's the best matchup that Texas A&M is going to get, and I'm going to go over LSU in a little bit. But after LSU, Texas A&M plays at Ole Miss, which Ole Miss wasn't overly impressive last year. Then they have a bye after Ole Miss, and then they play Mississippi State, which that team was also not good. And then after that, they finish up the season at Arkansas. And that's again, this kind of makes me wonder, if Texas A&M and Florida both finish 8-0, who's going to get the conference championship? Or are there going to be more conference games in 2021? Because remember, the NCAA women's volleyball season is extending from now until like probably November, early December, all the way to late January, and then that season's going to extend all the way till the beginning of April, and then the NCAA finals is going to be late April. So a lot to take in, and it just extends the NCAA women's volleyball season, but it's kind of cool. It gives that's kind of a courtesy considering it gives the other teams a chance to like catch up, like the Pac-12, the Big West, the WAC, the Big Ten, the Mountain West Conference. All those conferences are going to get a chance to catch up to the other conferences, and eventually everyone's going to get non-conference games, whether they played currently right now or not. So either way, it is still flawed in my opinion. I think they should have at least given Texas A&M or Florida some sort of challenge. I guess Georgia is kind of a challenge, but to me, I think Florida will just breeze by Georgia. I think Georgia can give them a somewhat of a tough match, but I don't know. I'd have to see Georgia to believe that Georgia is a good team. But that's not until late November, where it's Thanksgiving, so I digress. Alright, so now continuing on with the Texas A&M LSU matchup. Now we get into LSU. Okay, so this LSU team did not make the NCAA tournament. They did have a standout win over Texas A&M, which is impressive. I'll give them a golf clap on that one. But that's kind of where the buck stops for this team. They weren't overly impressive. They finished 15-13, 9-9 in conference, and again, they didn't really have too many standout wins. They did take a set off Kentucky, but they lost. Like I said, they beat Texas A&M. They didn't beat the big tough teams like Missouri, Kentucky, Florida. That's why I think LSU wasn't really the best matchup. But looking at this team, looking at the players that return, I now have a change of heart for this team. So their kill leader, Taylor Bannister, returns. She is a senior right side who had 438 kills last year, which is good stuff right there. 400. When you crack the 400 kill mark and you're close to 500, you did something right. Imagine if LSU actually had a postseason, like whether it's NIVC or NCAA. But still. So the next kill leader is Samantha Hill, who was a sophomore outside hitter. She had 262 kills as a freshman last year. Good stuff. Bannister hit 257 as a hitting percentage, while Hill had a hitting percentage of 211. Whitney Foreman had 193 kills, and she had a hitting percentage of 146. In terms of dig-wise, Reagan Cianciulli had 445 digs as a sophomore last year. She was a junior last year. I kind of wrote down that she was a junior. And she is a senior. So LSU does return their right side hitter and their libero, which led them in digs and in kills. So that's good stuff right there. Good stuff. And then they also return sophomore setter Carly Rose, who had 962 assists last year, which is good stuff. And she was kind of the only one who was playing setter for the most part. And luckily she stayed healthy and she stayed on that court, which is good stuff. Which is really good stuff, honestly. And the fact that she was able to do that as a freshman is big stuff right there. When it comes to freshmen playing the setter position, that is a huge hurdle you have to get through, considering especially considering a freshman playing at the collegiate level. That's tough stuff right there. So honestly, it's good that LSU returns these players, because they definitely need them if they're going to contend in the oh-so-tough SEC. So looking at LSU schedule, before I get into my little prediction, I got to look at this LSU schedule. So after Texas A&M, LSU plays Mississippi State, then they play Ole Miss, and then they play at Alabama. So that's also kind of a cakewalk schedule. The only difference is Texas A&M is kind of not really their cakewalk. It's their big tough matchup. It's their boogeyman matchup. So if LSU plays their cards right, and if they win both matchups this week, and then they run the table throughout the rest of their matches, they could finish 8-0 as well as Florida, and that would be interesting. So, all right, now let's compare and contrast. So, compare and contrast, and let's get a final verdict. So, LSU returns a good portion of their team. I was impressed. I was thinking, it's probably going to be Texas A&M just dominating. But then but Texas A&M did not return their libero from last year and their outside hitter from last year. So, honestly, I think this can go either way when it comes to LSU and when it comes to Texas A&M. So, my prediction for this match. Okay, so this matchup is going to be at Texas A&M. So, I'm going to predict Texas A&M wins the first matchup in 4 sets. However, I think LSU makes the adjustments. They look back on film, they say, okay, we had a case of the jitters, no big deal, and then they take the second matchup in 5. So, in other words, I'm predicting LSU and Texas A&M to salvage a sweep. Personally, I think LSU is better than what I originally gave them credit for, but I definitely think Texas A&M is a definite good team. But at the same time, LSU returns all that talent, and LSU, I think, has something to prove. I mean, Texas A&M also does, but not as much as like some of the other mid-tier teams in the SEC. So honestly, I gotta go with a split at least. I think LSU has the talent for a split, but if they disappoint me, I'm not gonna pick them anymore. So that's kind of the only noteworthy matchup of the SEC. I will dive deeper into these previews once we get more exciting matchups like Kentucky Missouri is going to be a good one. That's the matchup I'm looking forward to the most. So now let's jump from the SEC all the way to the ACC, my favorite little conference that I've been enjoying, and let's preview Pitt and Notre Dame. So Notre Dame is 3-0. They didn't have any games last week because they had a bye. But this week they are home against Pitt, which is going to be some good stuff right there. Notre Dame has had themselves a really good season this year. They are 3-0, like I said, and they were number 5 in the ABCA coaches polls last I checked. They are led by Caroline Muth, who has 42 kills on the season. Actually, no. Charlie Niego has 45 kills on the season. She leads the team in kills, while Caroline Muth has 42 kills. Lindsay Miller has 27 kills, which is impressive stuff, and Aubrey Hamilton has 22 kills as well. So, assist-wise, Zoe Nunez has 126 assists, while dig-wise, Hattie Monson, the freshman libero, has 41 digs. Charlie Niego has 34 digs. Zoe Nunez has 33 digs, and Caroline Muth has 24 digs. So that right there is Notre Dame is in a nutshell for the most part. In terms of blocks, Hannah Thompson leads that department with 13 blocks overall. Caroline Muth has 12 blocks, which is also good stuff. And as a team, Notre Dame is hitting 161 while holding their opponents to 199, which is barely less than 200. Which obviously you should know. So that's good stuff for Notre Dame, holding their opponents to less than a hitting percentage under 200. That's when you know your libero is hustling on the court and your block is doing well as well. So good stuff on their part. And shout out to Marcus Losgreat joining me in the chat room. Appreciate you for popping in. His show, Gloves Off, will be coming on in an hour, and he's going to give you what you want, and he's going to give you what you need, and you know the rest. So anyway, back to the preview of Notre Dame and Pitt. So Pitt this year has been an interesting team. They lost their season. They got swept in their season opening series against Syracuse. But ever since then, Syracuse has kind of fallen off the wagon. They lost to Notre Dame and to Louisville, which is not so good stuff right there. So, as for Pitt, they actually had games last week against Boston College where they beat Boston College. The first matchup they won in 4, and then the second matchup they won in 3. That's not surprising, just because Boston College isn't really the best when it comes to women's volleyball. So Pitt has kind of gotten back on track. They are led by Kayla Lund, who leads the team in kills with 60. And I'm gonna try to get this girl's name right. Chinazi Day. I did hear that it was pronounced Day instead of Nadi or D. Chinaza Day. Chinaza Day is second on the team in kills with 34. Sabrina Starks has 24 kills, and then Chiamaka Nwokolo has 20 kills. And then assist-wise, this team has had themselves a 6-2. So they are actually led by Lexis Akio, who has 69 assists, while Kylie Levers has 66 assists. Dig-wise, and actually this is strange. This hasn't been fully updated yet, which dang it, Pitt, you haven't updated your stats. So I'm just now looking at this. These aren't fully updated, but it's whatever. Kayla Lund or Ashley Rowski leads the team in digs with 33 digs, while Kayla Lund has 28 digs. And then in terms of blocks, Chinaza Day has 11 blocks. They only have 24 blocks on the season, while how many did Notre Dame? And in terms of blocks, they had 23.5. So, okay. So I guess Pitt is right where they want to be in terms of blocks. It kind of is difficult because no regular season, no preseason. But I digress. So Pitt has allowed their opponents to hit hitting percentages of 236, while they've hit a hitting percentage of 267, which is pretty good stuff right there. And honestly, I think that first series against Syracuse was a little bit of rust and pregame jitters for for Pitt, and because Pitt has such high expectations. Like, you're asking them to go on the road to beat Syracuse, when Syracuse, I guess, was a sneaky good team, and also because Syracuse just wanted it more, and they had home court advantage, which is good stuff. But I think Pitt has calmed down, and I think they've prepared themselves a little bit better. I mean, obviously Pitt just beat Boston College, but it's good to get some wins, especially since there was no preseason. So now for the matchup. Okay, so Pitt is a good team. I think that first series against Syracuse doesn't do them justice. As for Notre Dame, I've said this before and I'll say it again. Returning all those players from last year has really benefited them, and that first game against Louisville showed it. It's sad that we didn't get Louisville Notre Dame Part 2, but that's okay. And also the fact that Notre Dame beat Syracuse both times twice was good stuff as well. They did struggle in the first match, but the second match they took them to the shed, which is good stuff right there. So, honestly, it can go either way with Pitt and Notre Dame. I'm going to say the two teams split. I think Notre Dame takes the first match, and then they get themselves in a nice little comfortable position thinking, oh, we're now in the driver's seat for the ACC championship, while Pitt is kind of in a desperate situation where they need to win as much as possible, and then they need help from the rest of the ACC and hope that everything gets to be like a logjam at the end of the year. So we don't even know how the end of the year is going to be happening, considering not all of these teams play an equal amount of conference games. So that's kind of disappointing. And as for Notre Dame, I don't know if they're going to reschedule Notre Dame and Louisville Part 2, but I hope they do. They do. Please, God. But I digress on that one. So, and then also Notre Dame has to be careful. They can't afford to lose both these matchups. Otherwise, Louisville can take the lead. Louisville is idle this week. They have a bye. But then they play Pitt next week, which is going to be another big test. And best believe I'm going to be talking about Pitt and Louisville. So there's that. Duke doesn't play again. Duke is 4-1 in the ACC, but they don't play until they get Virginia Tech. I can see them winning that one. Georgia Tech has Wake Forest, like I said, and then they have Clemson. Clemson picked up their first victory against Miami, which I'll be talking about in a little bit. And then Miami, I'll be talking about in a little bit as well. So overall, when it comes to the ACC, there are some contenders, and then there are some pretenders. I'll be getting into the contenders and pretenders later on. So let's try to get through some of these other matchups as quick as possible. But I'm going to say Pitt takes the second matchup while Notre Dame takes the first matchup, and then it creates an interesting scenario for Notre Dame going forward. So hopefully that is the case. I just don't want I don't want it to be both sweeps when it comes to like one team. So we'll see how it goes. So let's keep it locked into the ACC as we have Florida and Miami as our third match I'm going to preview. Okay, so Florida State had themselves a rough weekend against Georgia Tech. But Georgia Tech is so freaking talented with Julia Bergman and Mariana Brambilla, the dynamic duo of Georgia Tech. And also was Florida State's first matchup of the season last year. So we can't overly blame them that much, but still. They play Miami. It's going to be at Florida State. Now, Miami was such a disappointment last weekend. In their first match against Clemson, they lost in 5 sets. I was so disappointed. I thought Miami was so much better, but they struggled against Clemson. All their sets were close, and they lost all those. They lost 2 out of those 3 close sets. In sets 2 and 3, they lost those close sets, and then the 4th set they just ran past Clemson, forcing a 5th set, but then Clemson was able to get back on track and take the 5th set, which is kind of impressive, but I was so disappointed. I mean, I was singing high praises for Miami, but again, this just goes to show you, Miami is just, I don't think they're consistent. I don't think they're fully consistent, because it showed when they didn't sweep Wake Forest. Wake Forest was supposed to finish second to last in the ACC. When you're Miami, you're supposed to sweep Wake Forest, get on out of that, and then get on out of that gym and get on to the next one. So So Miami and Florida State is going to be so good. Like, granted, Florida State's still looking for their first win, but Miami is hungry. This is Miami's true test. This is going to prove if their win over Georgia Tech was for real or a fluke. Miami is led by Elizaveta Lukianova, who has 116 kills. Angela Grieve has 66 kills. Janice Liao has 61 kills. Lauren Tarnoff, who I'm high on when it comes to ACC freshmen, has 53 kills. And I expect Lauren Tarnoff to have a big game as well. She wants to be the ACC, make the ACC freshman team and maybe get ACC freshman of the week. I want to see that. I want to see that determination that she had in that article when she says, I'm going to work at it. I want that same determination from Lauren Tarnoff. I know she's just a freshman middle blocker, but I think she has the potential. I think she's going to be the X factor for Miami. So as for Florida State, they are led by Emma Clothier, who has 23 kills. Jasmine Martin has 15 kills, and Morgan Chacon has 12 kills. So overall, I can't really judge Florida State all that much, considering Georgia Tech is just such a good team. Like, there's a reason why Georgia Tech had 2 first-place votes. I don't think that first match against Georgia Tech does Florida State any justice, especially when Florida State had no preseason matchups to go in, and I think they were on a 2-week bye, and then their season started later than normal. So overall, and then Miami, on the other hand, they've had 3 full weeks of volleyball where they've played opponents, and they've already played 6 ACC matchups. So after this week, Miami's going to be idle for the rest of the season. They'll just be working out and watching film and scouting and all that other stuff. So overall, I can't really judge. It's kind of tough to pick between Florida State and Miami. On one hand, Florida State looks, I think, is better than what the Georgia Tech game looked like. But then Miami, I think, is so much better than what that Clemson loss showed. I mean, they played Georgia Tech tougher than Florida State, but again, consider this. Florida State didn't have any sort of preseason, and they had no games. They had to go straight into Georgia Tech cold turkey. So, it's tough. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I think it's going to be a split. I hate predicting splits, but honestly, I think Miami is talented. I think they have potential in the ACC. I think they're a possible contender for the ACC title. They're just not playing their cards right. I think it's because they have such a good freshman class, but they're kind of struggling to put it all together. And then Florida State, I just think, is going to be a much better team at home. I think in their gymnasium, and now that they've got a match under their belt, I expect big things out of them. But I do expect Miami to take the second match. I expect a split. I expect Florida State to get the first match, and then Miami to get the second match. If I see a sweep, I'm going to be talking about this next week between these two teams, and I'm going to be going hard on the team that didn't show up. I'm either going to be going hard on Miami, who I was singing praises about, that I had a lot of confidence on after they beat Georgia Tech in that first weekend, or I'm going to be going after Florida State, who lost at home to their crosstown rival. So definitely do tune in for that next week. So now let's jump from the ACC over to the Big 12 for this little matchup between Kansas State and Texas. Now, on paper, this looks like it's a mismatch, but this matchup is actually kind of crucial. Texas is still the leader of the Big 12, but Kansas State is still right behind them. They're not too far off on them. So, and looking at the Big 12 standings, we obviously have Texas undefeated at 6-0, while Kansas State is 3-1. Kansas State's only loss came against Iowa State, which was such a disappointment. But that was the first game of the season, and they were upsets all over the place. Like, you look at Kansas and Baylor, like I said, that was just a crazy matchup. Anyway, as for Texas, Logan Exelton continues to do her thing for Texas. She has been named Big 12 Player of the Week the past 3 weeks. She has 99 kills and a hitting percentage of .351. She is one heck of a wrecking ball. Skylar Fields has 65 kills and a hitting percentage of .321. Breon Butler and Molly Phillips each have 46 kills. Jenna Gabriel is just dishing out the rock like it's ice cream on a hot summer day with 243 assists. And then dig-wise, they're led by Morgan O'Brien, who has 77 digs. Jenna Gabriel has 46 digs. So that's good stuff right there. And then in terms of blocks, Asia O'Neal has 25 blocks. Well, actually, she doesn't lead the team in blocks. Breon Butler leads the team in blocks with 27 blocks. Asia O'Neal is actually second in blocks with 25. Fun fact, Asia O'Neal is actually the daughter of Jermaine O'Neal, former NBA player. Bet y'all didn't know that. But that's kind of your fun fact. At first, I thought she was Shaq's daughter, but then he only had one. I think he only had like one son. That was Sharif. So I think he has a son and a daughter. But that's NBA stuff. I digress on that. So as for Kansas State, what makes Kansas State so special? They're 3-1, and last weekend, Kansas State beat West Virginia. So actually, Kansas State had a bye. Their last series, they beat West Virginia both times in 5 sets. And they were currently number 15 in the AVCA polls, so Kansas State kind of has their work cut out, especially coming off of a bye. So, going to be tough stuff right there. They are led by Aaliyah Carter, who has 45 kills, only a hitting percentage of .165, which is kind of underwhelming. Bryn Carlson has 34 kills and a hitting percentage of .255. And the third person in kills is Jaden Nemhard, who has 24 kills and a hitting percentage of .351. Only 4 hitting errors as well, so good stuff. Shelby Martin leads the Kansas State in assists with 153. In terms of digs, they are led by Mackenzie Morse, who has 46 assists, while Jackie Smith has 35 digs. And like I said, Mackenzie Morse has 46 digs. And then in terms of blocks, they are led by Abigail Archibong, who has 19 blocks. In terms of hitting percentage, Kansas State has allowed their opponents to hit .219 while they are hitting .247. And as for Texas, they are hitting .142 while they're holding their opponent's hitting percentage to a whop only .146. This Texas team is for real, man. Which is why I'm going to take them to win both matchups against Kansas State. Nothing against Kansas State, but I just think that this is now their true challenge. They faced Iowa State. They got a win. They got a split in that series. They beat West Virginia. Then they had a bye. Now they're in for a rude awakening. They do get the luxury of playing at Kansas State, but honestly, I just don't see it happening. I just see Texas winning both those matchups. Maybe Kansas State takes a set off Texas. But I just don't think it'll happen. I just think Texas is just such a complete team. So it's going to be tough for them. So we'll see. So now let's jump from the Big 12. Let's jump from Power 5 conference to not so Power 5 conference, as we'll be getting Louisiana and Texas State in our weekly big time matchups. So this matchup was actually slated for last week, but then it got postponed because I think someone had COVID-19. So that was sad face. But they're going to have it this week. Both teams are in first place in the Sun Belt Conference. Both teams are undefeated. Louisiana is 5-0, while Texas State is 3-0. They were supposed to play UT Arlington a couple weeks ago, but then UT Arlington had to postpone that and move that to later on in the week. Or later on in the season. They are playing in the middle of the November month. It's the last regular season week of the Sun Belt Conference, and then it's the Sun Belt Conference tournament and all that. So, anyway, I believe last week I said Louisiana was going to take 2 out of 3 against Texas State. I'm going to keep my word on that. I think that's how it's going to be. Nothing really changed. Nothing changed since last week. Both teams had to postpone their matchup, so unfortunately we couldn't get that matchup. But this week we're for sure going to get it. So I'm excited for Texas State and Louisiana, and I think that's going to be that's a noteworthy matchup that's not in the Power 5 conference. Now let's keep one more preview, and then we're going to play contenders and pretenders, and then I'll let you all get on your way to the rest of your night. So this final matchup comes from the Sun Belt Conference. It's between Coastal Carolina and South Alabama. Both of these teams are 4-1. Well, actually, Coastal Carolina is 3-0 in the Sun Belt Conference, while South Alabama is 4-1 in the Sun Belt Conference. So South Alabama's had themselves an interesting season. In non-conference play, they are 0-4. In conference play, they are 4-1. It seems like when it came to the non-conference play, that kind of was their tipping point. Their only loss of the season their only loss in conference play was to Troy, who is also 4-1 in the Sun Belt Conference, which is good stuff. This week, Troy is idle with a bye, but this week South Alabama plays Coastal Carolina, like I said. South Alabama is led by Hannah Maddox, who has 88 kills, while Hannah Harris has 74 kills. Rebecca Walk has 56 kills, and Megan Jones has 51 kills. Assist-wise, South Alabama is led by Maddie Sobolski, who has 280 assists. In terms of digs, Rachel Hickey has 176 assists, and second in digs is Hannah Harris, who has 48 digs, and then Hannah Maddox has 45 digs. But that 176 dig mark by Rachel Hickey is pretty impressive. So as for Coastal Carolina, they are led by Annette Nemeth, who leads the team in kills with 43. Ani Bozdeva has 31 kills, while Jelena Prolik has 19 kills. Assist-wise, this team seems to run the 6-2 offense, as they are led by Brigida Petrenko, who has 67 assists, while Marita Borchik has 46 assists. Good stuff. And then dig-wise, they are led by Lena Perugini, who has 46 digs, while their second dig leader is Ani Bozdeva, who has 22 digs. So that's pretty much Coastal Carolina. Coastal Carolina has only played 3 matches, which I guess that's not really overly impressive, but it can kind of be a turning point. It could prove to be something eye-opening, especially if Coastal Carolina does happen to make the Sun Belt Conference interesting. Especially with the Sun Belt Conference tournament coming up. Well, but that's not for like another month or so. Okay, so overall, this one's tough to pick, but I'm gonna say South Alabama sweeps all 3 of those matchups. I'm not one to pick an all 3 sweep, but to me, I think South Alabama is just more experienced, and they have more matchups under their belt, and it helps that they played all those non-conference games. All those non-conference games resulted in losses, but you can't overly blame them. They lost to Stephen F. Austin, which is good. Then they lost to Louisiana, which I guess was a non-conference game, considering I guess those two teams aren't in the same Sun Belt Conference. I guess there's like a Sun Belt South or a Sun Belt North or a Sun Belt West or Sun Belt East. It shifts for the most part. So anyway, I just think that South Alabama's overall experience and with the fact that they've had matchups and that they're fresh of matchups, unlike Coastal Carolina, is going to help them tenfold. And then having played last week also helps them as well. Like, Coastal Carolina may be 3-0, but they've only beaten Georgia State, which doesn't really pop out to me. And sure, Coastal Carolina did play last week, but still, it doesn't really pop out to me. That's only their first matchup. I want to say that Georgia State is not good. They're only 2-8 on the season. Their only win came against Mercer and Georgia Southern, which isn't overly impressive, honestly. But again, I digress. So I'm going to take South Alabama to win both of their matchups. That way they'll keep pace in the Sun Belt Conference, whichever is the East or the West or the South and the North. And that's pretty much going to do it for the previews. Now let's get into contenders and pretenders. So, let's start with the Big 12. Texas, definite contender. Baylor, definite contender. Kansas State, pretender. Texas Tech, pretender. West Virginia, definite pretender. You get where the Big 12 is going. Everyone else is a pretender. If it weren't for Oklahoma playing Baylor, if Oklahoma was just a tad bit better than Texas or Baylor, I'd maybe say contender, but I don't see... The only way Texas gets beaten is if they beat themselves. So, overall, the Big 12 has only 2 contenders. Everyone else is pretty much a pretender, unless Kansas State proves me wrong, which, if that's the case, then I'm going to be eating a lot of crow next week. So, anyway, now let's go to the SEC. This one's going to be a lot fun, considering no team has played yet. So, Kentucky, definite contender. Florida, contender. Missouri, contender. Texas A&M, contender. Georgia, pretender. South Carolina, pretender. LSU, borderline contender. With their schedule, they can be a contender if they're not going to be getting any more conference games. Tennessee, pretender. Ole Miss, pretender. Arkansas, pretender. You get where this is going. The rest of the conferences are pretenders. So, unlike the Big 12, the SEC has more contenders. Like I said, Kentucky and Florida are kind of the front runners. It's too bad Kentucky and Florida don't face one another, because I would have definitely looked forward to that, but it is what it is. Now let's go to the ACC. So the ACC race is very, very interesting, and I'm going to have fun with this. So Notre Dame, first place, they're 3-0. Definite contender, especially with how they've been doing. They'll solidify themselves as a contender if they beat Pitt both times. So contender for Notre Dame. Louisville, definite contender, especially if they beat Pitt next week. Gonna be tough because they don't have any true standout wins, and that loss to Notre Dame hurt them. And the fact that we don't get Notre Dame Louisville Part 2 is kind of disappointing, but it is what it is. So Duke, 4-1, they are 100% pretender. I don't see how this team is a contender. They don't have any standout wins, and if let's say they somehow squeak their way to the ACC title, they don't deserve that conference title. Like, especially with that paper soft schedule, because their next matchup isn't until they play Virginia Tech. And Virginia Tech is slated to finish near the bottom. Honestly, Duke is a pretender. If Notre Dame gets the job done, then Duke is not going to be finishing as ACC champs. And it really sucks because I want to see Duke actually play a talented team like a Pitt or a Notre Dame or a Louisville or a Georgia Tech. So anyway, speaking of Georgia Tech, definite contender, especially if they win out. Like, if they win out, then they'll be 7-1, and it still is possible that Notre Dame could lose. Like, Notre Dame is not guaranteed to beat Pitt this weekend. Like, Pitt could come out fired up and ready to go against Notre Dame. So definitely do watch out for Georgia Tech. Miami of Florida. Borderline. I'm borderline of of sorry, yeah, some technical difficulties. We So anyway, we had some technical difficulties. So anyway, Miami of Florida, borderline contender. I don't think they're great, but I don't think they're bad. So overall, I think Miami is Like, it all depends. So I'll say borderline contender. Like, they're going to need a lot of help when it comes to winning that ACC. So, yeah. So, Pitt, definite contender, but their schedule gets really tough. Like, if they play like they did against Syracuse, they're not going to win that ACC. If they win out their games and they show that they definitely deserve to be ACC champs, they got it made. And I still don't know and again, I don't know if there's going to be any more conference games going forward. So after Pitt, everyone else is pretty much pretender for the most part. North Carolina is a pretender. They played North Carolina State this week. I don't see them winning that. Clemson, they're at Georgia Tech, and then eventually they're going to be at Florida State. Kind of, pretty much a pretender. They had their moment beating Miami, but that's pretty much it. Virginia Tech, pretender, especially with what's been going on with them. They do play Virginia this week, and that's going to be a fun little rivalry, but that's kind of where the buck stops. Virginia, pretender, unfortunately. Syracuse, pretender. Their series win against Pitt was kind of disappointing. Or, I wouldn't say it was disappointing, but after their series win against Pitt, they fell off the wagon and they lost to Notre Dame and Louisville. And then this week they play Boston College. I can see them winning that, but again, that's where the buck stops. They're going to be 4-4, and unless they'll get more conference games, I just don't see them as a contender. Florida State, more so pretender. It's not because I think they're not good. It's because they started late in the season. And even if they sweep Miami, they'd have to run the table by beating Wake Forest and Clemson. And then they're still going to be 2 matches short, or 1 match short, because they're only playing Clemson 1 time, which I don't understand why. Why are some of these teams not getting full 2-set matches? What are you doing, man? Anyway, so North Carolina State, pretender. Wake Forest, pretender. Boston College, definite pretender. So the ACC is kind of up for grabs, and I hope it kind of gets into a last of the week race. And I also hope that Duke does. I really hope Duke doesn't win, because Duke doesn't deserve it. They haven't beaten anyone good. Please, somebody, anybody. Anyway, so Sun Belt Conference, Louisiana, contender. They are on their A game. Other than that 5-set, that dramatic 5-set game against Little Rock. Texas State, contender. They're always a perennial Sun Belt Conference team. Coastal Carolina, borderline contender. Their schedule makes them a good contender, but when it comes to Sun Belt Conference tournament, they better be ready. UT Arlington, pretender, especially when they play Texas State and Louisiana. They play Texas State 2 different times, at home and then away. So they're definite pretenders. I don't see them beating Louisiana or Texas State. Troy, somewhat contender. Their only tough game is against South Alabama, but other than that, I think this team might have a shot. They've split the first 2 matchups against South Alabama, but yeah. And then Arkansas State, pretender. I don't see them beating Louisiana or Texas State. They could make it interesting, though. South Alabama, semi-pretender, just because I don't think they're going to beat... Just because I don't think they're going to beat Troy. I think Troy is better than them. Georgia Southern, pretender. I don't see how they beat South Alabama or Troy or Coastal Carolina. App State, pretender. Little Rock, super pretender. Georgia State, pretender. UNL Monroe, absolute pretender. And then Independent, there is no conference, but Stephen F. Austin looks good. Missouri State doesn't have any games the remainder of their schedule. UTEP doesn't have any games on their schedule. North Texas has an impressive 5-set win over Stephen F. Austin, but they lost in 5 to UTEP. Houston Baptist has no games left on the schedule. UAB has games against Louisiana Tech and Southern Miss, and then they also play Western Kentucky and MTSU. And then MTSU only plays UAB, and Central Arkansas has lost 3 games and plays UNL Monroe 2 times. And then Chattanooga doesn't play any games. They only have 1 game, which is sad. And then Mercer doesn't have any games, which is cool. Southern Miss plays Louisiana Tech and UAB. And then Citadel is 1-3, and they don't have any games, as does Lamar. And we have not seen Army or Navy yet. So that's pretty much does it for the independent teams. And that's pretty much going to do it for the contenders and the pretenders. I know I went a little all over the place, but if you see their records, you pretty much can see who is the contender and who is the pretender. Like, the ACC is pretty much the most balanced, is pretty much the conference that's up for grabs. I mean, we have yet to see the SEC, but who knows? Like, maybe it'll be a dramatic conference finish just like last year. So, and you also got to remember, Kentucky even though Kentucky and Florida tied for the SEC championship, Florida lost to Kentucky both times, and Kentucky was awarded the 8th seed, while Florida was awarded the 10th seed. So that's cool stuff right there. And that's pretty much going to do it for Set Point. Once again, I know I bounced around, but it's kind of a new thing I decided to try, playing contenders and pretenders. And maybe I'll continue this whole thing, but it kind of is a better whole thing when there's like a full conference schedule. I think I'd be better off doing it in like the middle of the conference, but who knows? It's just a little test run. So that's going to pretty much do it, like I said, for Set Point. In less than 30 minutes, we have Marcus Losgreat going live with Set Point, and you could also follow me on Twitter at Teran Rodriguez 1, and then you could follow Set Point on Twitter at set_point, IE. Then you could tune into all of our shows on Spreaker and on all other podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, and iHeartRadio and whatnot. So, without any further delay, it is time to drop the beat, because I'm about to dip like a banana in chocolate. You feel me? Thank you all for tuning in to Set Point. If you're listening on the replay, I definitely appreciate you tuning in. If you're tuned in live, I definitely appreciate you tuning into Set Point tonight. I will be back next week with more Set Point for episode 16. Don't worry, I don't plan to do anything special or crazy. But I will catch you all Friday for the SoCal Supreme Court Show. Have a great rest of the night, everybody. Peace and blessings.